What is a hazard? We perform safety inspections in order to identify hazards. So what is a safety hazard? A hazard is anything that has the potential to cause harm, illness, injury, or damage. We often think of a safety hazard as a hazardous condition, like a puddle of water on the floor that we can visibly see. But safety hazards can also be hazardous acts or practices, like standing on a chair or not using required personal protective equipment. Hazards usually fall into one of these 5 classes. When performing an inspection, you do not need to identify the class. It's just helpful to know them so that you can ensure your eyes look for all types of hazards, not just the ones which are readily apparent. The types of hazards include chemical, biological, physical hazards, energy hazards, and psychosocial hazards. Let's get started taking a look at each type. Keeping in mind the hazard classes identified on the previous slide, chemical, biological, physical, energy, and psychosocial, take a moment to look at this picture and see how many hazards from the different areas you can identify in the next few minutes. We'll take a look at the answers a little later on. Chemical hazards take many forms. The main hazard is inhalation, but absorption, penetration, and ingestion are also possible. Examples of possible chemical hazards in our work environment could include improper storage of chemicals. Think storage areas left unlocked, science chemicals left out of the cupboard, chemicals being used that are expired, or even having banned chemicals in our storage areas. There is a list of banned science substances, as well as a list of approved cleaning products for custodial. For example, PVNC does not allow the use of bleach except in schools requiring it for well treatment. Science chemicals. Consider, how are they transported? Are acids and bases kept separate on the cart? Does the cart have edges to contain a spill? Are books kept on the chemical cart or separately so as to not get contaminated? Gas cylinders not restrained or stored improperly would also be of concern. This may happen in science or welding areas, or there may be no cart available to properly transport the cylinder. There may be a hazard with gasoline or diesel stored in an improper jerry can instead of the safety can as pictured. These cans are required when gas is stored inside our facility outside of a flammable storage cabinet, or when gas is dispensed indoors. It may apply in custodial, transportation, manufacturing, or construction areas. Science chemical or waste stored in fume hoods may be another concern. If it was not locked up or not labeled as to what it is. Another chemical hazard may be improper WSIC labels or supplier labels or workplace labels, or missing safety data sheets. You may find storage containers that are cracked with a lid missing or not properly sealed, or the inside of a chemical cabinet which is corroding, quite possibly because substances are not capped or the cap is leaking or venting improperly. Is the appropriate personal protective equipment available and in use for the chemicals? Look at the safety data sheet for the needs. It's not always just gloves, but sometimes an apron, a different type of gloves, or splash goggles that are needed. And is there a chemical spill kit in the science or auto area? These are just some of the chemical hazards that you may see in our workplaces. Here are a few examples of the types of chemical hazards you might note in an inspection. Starting on the bottom shelf. This gas can is approved for gas storage in this context, as it is stored inside of a flammables cabinet. However, there is a yellow gas cap missing from this can, so it's venting into the cabinet presently. Again, on the middle shelf, you can see that there's a bottle of bleach with no lid perching precariously on some smaller bottles. You may also note some unknown chemicals in this cabinet. Each product should have a label, and if the supplier label goes missing or becomes damaged, then a WSIC workplace label would need to be applied. If you're inspecting in a secondary school science area, this chart should be posted and is helpful in helping you to identify which types of chemical products should be stored together. Each cabinet should have an identifier of the numbers 1 through 8 and colored circles, and all of the products within that cabinet should have the same storage identification on each bottle. For example, 4s would not be stored with 2s, 6s would not be in the 5s cabinet, and so forth. In some situations, 2 different numbers may be stored in the same cabinet on different shelves or with distance between one another. Biological hazards can be presented by plants, animals, or microbial agents, vector and foodborne diseases, bloodborne pathogens, and body fluids. Examples include such things as mold, fungus, and mildew, which might present on a surface as wet tiles, furry, jelly-like, or black-orange spots. Needle sticks and sharps, such as improper disposal of needles, lancets, broken glassware that could poke someone. If it is collected, is there a disposal and pickup process for it? Also, bacteria, viruses, and germs would fall in this category. Plants, like giant hogweed, which is pictured in the bottom photo of this slide, or poison ivy, poison oak, or poison sumac. Is there evidence of insects, bugs, rodents, or animals inside of a facility? These can also harbor disease. And blood and body fluids. For example, you may note improper or lack of appropriate personal protective equipment or procedures and training for cleaning of biological hazards. Physical hazards would be things like musculoskeletal disorders. Examples would be physical elements that can result in such things as awkward postures, force or repetition, vibration, contact stress, or temperature. Environmental hazards, such as confined spaces, asbestos or lead in the workplace, which may have not been identified, or physical or energy hazards, such as radiation, noise, extreme temperatures, insufficient or excessive lighting. Mechanical and equipment hazards would be hazards due to moving parts, tools, loads, workpieces, projected, solid or fluid materials, Things like entanglement, friction, abrasion, cutting, severing, shearing, stabbing, puncturing, impact injuries or crushing injuries that could occur, or where a person might be drawn in or trapped because of a moving piece of equipment. Injection of pressurized liquid would also fall under a mechanical hazard. Slip, trip, and fall hazards refer to slips, trips, and fall potential at the same or different levels. Consider a change in floor surfaces, housekeeping concerns that could cause a trip or slip, suitable footwear, is it being worn? Additional physical hazards would be things like material storage. Is it sufficient and safe? Are heavy items stored low? Or trip hazards because of cords, boxes, or changes in grade. Blocked access or egress routes would be another physical hazard. And structural, housekeeping, or furniture concerns would refer to things like leaky drains, wet ceilings, equipment concerns, leaking windows, floors, carpets, or stairs that are damaged, or outlets in the floor that are creating a trip hazard. Ladders. Are ladders available for access? Are they in good condition? And do lifts have annual inspection cards or evidence of annual inspections? Other types of physical hazards which may be present in our workplace would include things like the emergency wash station. Has it been properly maintained or checked? Have emergency devices and emergency plans been properly communicated? Had their monthly and annual checks? Do exit doors open easily and they are not blocked? Are exit lights properly illuminated? Are there 3 fire drills per semester in your facility? Are sprinkler heads kept clear? And in industrial kitchens, such as in high schools or cafeterias, are commercial extinguishers checked every 6 months? There should be a sticker on them to indicate such. And are lockdown and nuclear plans, if they're necessary, available for your school? Musculoskeletal injuries. Examples would be things like ergonomics, workstation setup and design, poor chairs for a workstation, and ideally, we want the chair to have 5 casters and be adjustable. We also want the person sitting in it to have a 90-degree angle at their hips, knees, and elbows. Is there a lack of carts or dollies or material handling equipment where needed? Are there significant force, posture, or repetition risk factors in the environment? Improper tools for the job? Trip hazards from cords? Or improper lifting techniques being used? Are people asked to move heavy items alone? This should always be a 2-person job. A note on ladder inspections. The Worksite Inspection Committee is also tasked with completing monthly ladder inspections of ladders within the facility. Each ladder should be tagged with an inspection sticker that is signed off each month. The things to look for when inspecting a ladder are to check that the feet, steps, braces, side rails, and spreaders are all in good condition. There should be rubber feet on the bottom of the ladder. All fasteners must be present and tight, and there must be a sticker on the ladder to indicate that it has been rated by CSA as a grade 1, 1A, 1AA, or 2. There are many types of energy hazards, not just electrical. There is also magnetic energy, thermal energy, vibration, radiation, and laser hazards. Some examples in our workplace may include electrical hazards, such as extension cords that are used as permanent electrical wiring, broken third prongs on equipment, nicks in cords which leave the wires exposed, or receptacles that are placed near water. There may also be potential for contact with live electrical, and you may want to pay attention to whether proper lockout, tagout procedures are being employed where necessary. In addition, there may be thermal hazards, such as burns or scalds from contact with extreme temperatures, like in welding or science classes, flames, or even radiation. Lasers also present potential eye or skin injuries and potential for burns or puncture wounds, as well as laser air contaminants. We're starting now to see laser cutters in tech. These processes should be enclosed and properly interlocked so the operation cannot start until the human is behind closed doors, protected, and the exhaust system is running. Types of psychosocial hazards. This is the last hazard we will discuss. Psychosocial hazards are foreseeable hazardous events and situations produced as a result of influencing factors. Psychosocial hazards can influence the probability of hazardous situations developing. Examples could include human errors, such as slips where a worker pushes the wrong button, lapses where a worker forgets the safe operating procedure, mistakes where a worker thought they turned something off and they didn't, or even violations because of a blatant disregard in order to cut corners or complete a job quicker. Psychosocial hazards is the reason why we have workplace violence and harassment processes in place, or emergency procedures, or work alone processes. They allow us to plan in advance for such foreseeable hazardous events so that folks know what to do if something like this were to happen. Considering your inspection, is there training lacking that could result in human error or risk-taking? Or is there a policy or safe work process or training that's missing? This is where it may fall. Here are a few examples of hazards that you may find in our workplaces. The top photo, there are exposed wires. And the bottom photo, you may be able to see that the power bar is likely overloaded. In this picture, the eye wash station is not readily accessible or properly cleaned. These may be other hazards that someone would write up. As you can see, here are some blocked access or egress routes. Again, a blocked egress route coming from the stage. And in the bottom photo, these pieces of wood should be suspended against tipping and falling by some type of kick plate and chain in the middle. In this photo, the floor drain cover is missing. There is an eye wash station missing if this is where this acid battery is refilled or charged. And I might be likely to check that all of these decanted product bottles are properly labeled with workplace labels. There are a few hazards that one might note in this photo. It looks like there's a failure to comply with work practices. There may be a lack of training. There are slip hazards because of the dust, trip hazards because of the cord. The dust collector doesn't even look like it's being used. There's a blocked fire exit. The wood pile is not contained from falling over. The fire pull station is not accessible. This gentleman does not look to be climbing the ladder properly. The electrical panels are blocked, and that eye wash station is highly unlikely in compliance with the safety data sheet to provide a minimum of 15 minutes of flush time in the event of an eye injury, which this gentleman is likely to receive with no guard on his equipment and no eye goggles on. Here is an illustration of how cylinders should not be stored. These cylinders should be chained up. And this drill press requires the type of guard that's shown in the bottom picture. Standing on a chair is not the best way to be putting posters up. A step stool should be made available to this person. I would also be concerned about the damage to the floor, creating a trip hazard to both staff and students. And there are a multitude of problems in this photo. The fire exit is blocked. The fire extinguisher is not mounted. The fire pull station is blocked. Is this an electrical panel that the hose is wrapped around? The staircase is blocked by the recycling bins. And is the wet floors an ongoing hazard in this workplace? Let's revisit this picture from earlier. Here's some of the hazards I spotted. Did you see them? There's a respirator hung on the cleaning card. This is not hygienic storage, but it also prompts me to ask, why does he need this? Could an alternative chemical or workplace procedure mitigate the need for this and alleviate the risk? There's a wet mop soaking into the floor, potentially causing a mold or slip trip issue. Chemical spray bottles on the top shelf that look like they're without a lid securely attached, and there's no WSIC workplace label on those bottles. A potential injury or spill waiting to happen. There's a wet ceiling leak, a box perched in a pretty precarious position, a ladder and brooms that are leaning against walls, not secured against tipping and falling, an extension cord and cardboard boxes on the floor, creating a trip hazard. What else did you spot? Are there additional questions you might ask of this worker? Once your inspection has been completed and you've identified areas of concern, we need to now identify how we will control those hazards. Although the principal or vice principal may be tasked with identifying the actions that will be taken on each item identified, that doesn't mean that as an inspection committee representative, you can't make recommendations as to how the problem may be solved. In health and safety, we try to control hazards in the following manner. Controlling hazards first at the source or the path before we have to take actions at the worker. An example of this may be re-engineering or enclosing a process, or eliminating or substituting a hazard at the source that we may be identified. For example, we may remove a chemical from use and put a less hazardous chemical in place. An example of hazard control at the path is identifying a change in procedures, administrative changes, or work practices, or adjusting ventilation so that an area is better ventilated. And then at the worker, which is the last place that we normally choose to control hazards, things like hygiene practices, putting personal protective equipment requirements in place, or doing worker training. One of the things that you're asked to do during your workplace safety inspection is to check the health and safety bulletin board. It's likely found in the staff room at your workplace, and should contain a copy of the PVNC Occupational Health and Safety Policy, as well as the procedures for workplace violence and harassment, a copy of the current Occupational Health and Safety Act, posters as illustrated here, the blue 123 WSIB poster, as well as the green and yellow and white Health and Safety at Work poster. There should be copies of the Joint Health and Safety and Worksite Inspection Committee minutes, copies of recent inspections of your workplace, first aid or contact information, and any recent orders from the Ministry of Labor. These are just some of the contents that should be on your Health and Safety Bulletin board. So, having completed this safety inspection training, what if you don't feel qualified? Please know, no one is expecting you to find every safety hazard in your workplace. We each bring to the role our own experiences and knowledge. There's no liability on you for missing something. But feel free to ask questions. Both your Board Joint Health and Safety Committee representatives and the Board Health and Safety Officer are happy to help. Or ask for demonstrations, ask someone to accompany you, or ask the staff working in the area about their concern, or to explain how things work. It's important to note at this point in time, when completing your workplace safety inspection, you'll be entering numerous classrooms. What I've suggested to others is to make yourself recognizable so that you don't have to interrupt class each time you step in. For example, some school inspection committees have safety vests in red that they wear, or a clipboard that they carry each month when they're completing their safety inspection. This allows you to be identifiable and not have to interrupt class or explain yourself or your reasons for being there. Staff will inherently understand why you're there and can approach you if they have a concern. Should you require additional resources or have any questions or concerns about the content presented here, you may be able to access the Loop, Departments, Health and Safety for additional board policies and procedures or guidelines in regards to health and safety, the www.ccohs.ca website has a great selection of resources and information on a variety of health and safety issues. The Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act and regulations can be found at www.elaws. And you're welcome to contact anyone from your Joint Health and Safety Committee or the PVNC Health and Safety Officer. Contact details are shared in the email that you've received, and a contact list for the Health and Safety Committee is available on the Loop and the shared Internet File Repository in Google Drive.